Everyone, and welcome to this session launching the 86th issue of the Humanitarian Exchange. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes in case there are other people who are logging on now, and then we'll make a start. Right, so there's more people who are joining, but we'll go ahead and make a start, and then hopefully they'll at best they'll just miss the welcome. So my name's Kerry Holloway. I'm the interim HPN coordinator, and very excited to welcome you to the launch of the 86th edition of the Humanitarian Exchange. The Humanitarian Practice Network is an independent global forum for humanitarian practitioners that was established in 1994 and is managed by the Humanitarian Policy Group at ODI Global. It maintains its own editorial stance and isn't directed in any way by donor funding. Our audience is humanitarian practitioners, and we publish pieces by humanitarian practitioners for humanitarian practitioners. We've recently undergone a transformation toward a more networked partnership model with stronger links to humanitarian crises and more emphasis on the voices of local and national responders. The main way people interact with HPN is through our website. So there you'll find several different kinds of outputs, from shorter articles to longer in-depth network papers, book-length good practice reviews, as well as our flagship magazine, the Humanitarian Exchange, which is what we're all here for today. So today we're celebrating the launch of the 86th edition of the Humanitarian Exchange on climate change adaptations and humanitarian programming. This edition has been edited by Paul Knox-Clark, who's principal of the ADAPT initiative, and he'll be moderating the session today. It was also edited by Mihir Bhatt, the director of the All India Disaster Mitigation Unit, and he'll wrap up the panel with a few thoughts today. The edition contains 12 articles, which we're not going to hear about all 12 today. They're written by a range of local, national, and international practitioners, and they explore how aid actors are adapting their programming to take climate change considerations into account. These adaptations are necessary because climate change is not just a hypothetical future issue, but it's a priority now, and for many of the communities that humanitarian actors serve. The programs address a wide range of risk, from lightning strikes to malnutrition, because while climate change is a global phenomenon, it's also intensely local. The link to the full edition should now be in the chat, and I urge everyone to explore the full range of articles beyond those that will be presented on here today. And with that, I'll hand over to Paul, who will begin by introducing the speakers.
Thank you so much, Kerry, and welcome everybody. We've got some great speakers today with a diverse range of experience and work around the climate area. So let me start by introducing them. Robert Butcher has over 25 years experience in working on projects across Africa, the Middle East and Southeast Europe, including in conflict-affected contexts. He's currently the program manager for conflict climate resilience at the ICRC in Niger, focusing on climate smart infrastructure, on anticipatory action and community resilience, which you'll be telling us about in a minute. Previously, he led transdisciplinary research on water and agriculture systems at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, as well as working as senior advisor for water and sanitation at the Austrian Development Agency, ADA. Welcome, Robert. Lynn Chemtai is a community development and climate justice advocate working with Womankind Kenya. She specializes in grassroots engagement, women and youth empowerment, with a key focus in building community resilience and driving sustainable impact. Lynn is actually at another workshop and has joined us from there. So thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us today. Akshat Littell worked for 17 years in practical action and was the South Asia Regional Director until March 2023, guiding the organization's development management programs and projects in Nepal, Bhutan, India, and Sri Lanka. He's also a long-serving steering committee member of Durog Nivaran, my apologies for the pronunciation, a South Asia regional network on DRR, and currently is chair of that network. And last but by no means least, Vishal Pathak has a social science background and works with AIDMI, the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and worked very closely with us on the development of this paper. His current engagement is on promoting and strengthening climate adaptation measures with and for small businesses and small farmers across 11 locations in India. He's an expert in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation, and has a particular focus on heat and heat emergencies, which he'll be telling us about later. So with no further ado, let me launch into some of the areas that are authors of 4 of the articles in the Humanitarian Exchange paper discussed. There are, as Kerry said, more for you to read, but we wanted to give you a nice buffet of tasty morsels from our authors. So starting with you, Robert. The International Committee of the Red Cross is, a well-known champion in the humanitarian area, but it's really well known for its strong focus on the humanitarian needs created by conflict. Now, at the same time, ICRC, despite this war, as well as this conflict focus, has increasingly been engaging with climate change. So why? Why does a conflict-oriented organization get engaged in the climate threat?
Yeah, Paul, thank you very much for this question. It's a good question. I mean, it's often the same people who suffer from the devastating consequences of armed conflict and the effect of climate change. Nowhere is this more evident than in regions like the Sahel, where the humanitarian needs are inseparable from climate and conflict-induced disasters. So that's why the ICRC has made climate change a transversal priority in its institutional strategy, but also, for instance, we have strongly advocated for the COP28 declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace. I mean, the urgency is clear. In the Sahel, for instance, the number of extremely hot days, so we are talking about the temperatures above 35 degrees, they have nearly doubled. So rainfall has become more erratic, droughts prolonged, and they are often followed by devastating floods. So Niger alone, for instance, loses 120 hectares of arable land every year. This is an equivalent of 460 football pitches every day. So in response, the ICRC has committed strengthening resilience to vulnerable communities. So it's an integrated approach of anticipatory action and also climate smart programming to rightly to support the communities to withstand conflict and climate shocks at the same time. So for instance, small change makes already a big difference. We are distributing emergency household kits to displaced families and also host communities in case of disasters. And now we also distribute improved cooking stoves alongside with these items. This allows us to reduce the firewood consumption by around 40%, which is very crucial in areas like the Sahel where firewood is extremely scarce. Another example is the 2024 floods. There we worked with the local authorities to maintain and manage the river flow observation stations. We trained the communities to read and react on these early warning alerts, and also provided the emergency response required. Sometimes this is as practical as delivering fuel to keep the heavy machinery running so that the authorities can build these protection dikes, which are necessary in time. So addressing the climate and conflict nexus is no longer optional. It is essential. So at the ICRC, we believe that integrating climate action into a humanitarian operation is not just saving lives today, but also building resilience for the future. Thanks.
So from what I'm hearing, there's not really, it doesn't really matter why people are in need. There is this evil mix of conflict and climate occurring in the places where you're working, and you're dealing with the needs rather than separating people out by the causes of the needs. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's the same people. No, I mean they are doubly affected by conflict and climate induced disasters at the same time. So you cannot separate them. And,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Moving to you, Lynn. At WCAG, I know that it's in the name, and I know from having had the opportunity and the privilege to talk to you about your work in the past as well. The organization has a particular mission around supporting women and girls. So sort of the question I'd like to ask you is, why does that mean, why does that make climate change important for you? What's the particular, if you like, gendered element of climate change that brings this onto your agenda as an organization which has a very strong focus on women and girls?
Okay, thank you so much for having me here today. So as you've mentioned, our goal at Womankind Kenya is to empower women and girls, including the vulnerable communities, through promoting their rights and also building community resilience against climate change. So for us, climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's a women and girls issue. So from our experience with the recent climate vulnerabilities that has been happening in Kenya, like drought and floods, we've been able to see firsthand how climate change have been affecting women differently. So from destroying livelihood to displacement to food security and water shortages. And in such instances, girls are often forced to drop out of school because they're burdened by the responsibility of supporting the family by walking long distances in search of water. And in this situation, it further exacerbates them or exposes them to other risks like gender-based violence and also child marriages as families struggle to cope with these hardships. On the other hand, we see that women, especially mothers, struggle to feed their families, while pregnant and lactating women are often denied or rather do not have access to essential health services. And in some instances, when displacement happens, we find that women are put in crowded camps, raising the issues of reproductive health and rights. And despite all this, women have always been an effective leaders in coming up with solutions. So from our experience working with them, we've seen how they've been able to come up with their own localized method to adapt to this situation. For example, coming up with their own traditional conservation methods and also practicing best climate smart farming practices. So, but always their contribution and voices are overlooked in the humanitarian processes. So for us, it becomes completely necessary for us to engage in climate action because it's about justice, it's about survival, and it's also about equity. And we believe when we support women-led initiatives and also advocate for climate just policies, it will ensure that women are at the table of decision making, and it will not make us just respond, but come up with a sustainable solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you particularly, I think, for underlining, as I know you do in your work so much, that it's not just a question of different vulnerabilities. It's also actually about the capacities of women and girls. And the work that you're doing is as those of you who read the articles will see, is very much around supporting and catalyzing those capacities, which we'll come on to in just a second. But before we do, Akshat, moving from Africa to Nepal, Your work in Nepal looked into using early warning mechanisms as part of anticipation and response. So looking at the risk of climate, particularly in terms of the risk of flooding, and setting up and working with early warning mechanisms around that. And it's an area, of course, which the early warning area is an area of great interest to many humanitarians and beyond the humanitarian sector. And I know it's a longer answer, but in a couple of minutes, I wondered if you could tell us, from your long experience of working in the early warning sector, what does it take to make an early warning system work?
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me here. I worked with Practical Action, and it was mainly in development, part rather than the humanitarian assistance. And from the very beginning, we thought that preparedness is very important because, the investment in preparedness, it is much lower compared to response and recovery after the disasters occur. Because early warning is part of preparedness. So this is preventive approach before any reaction. So every dollar spent on preparedness that can save multiple dollars that is required for both recovery and response. So I think humanitarian workers and organizations, they should also prioritize preparedness because it can greatly reduce the extent of damage during a disaster, and that means recovery cost also comes down quite significantly. And this approach is also very important because it builds on the resilience of the communities. Likewise, it helps them to make informed decisions. In many ways, preparedness reduces the vulnerability of the communities very well in advance. So early warning is much more than technology. It is not only about, providing them the information, but there are a lot of software activities required, a lot of community engagement, then ultimately their empowerment. Because building local capacity, that means required a lot of series of preparedness trainings, social facilitation, and a lot more. Before every monsoon preparedness, rain, they are prepared with some animation exercises. They are called mock drills. And that is with full participation of the government agencies, the telecom companies, and all the local stakeholders. And that provides a lot of trust, and that builds confidence of the local communities. And they are also involved in preparedness activities, so they are more likely to work together during the disaster response. So during the response also, they really work as a coherent team. So the preparedness also guarantees faster mobilization, primarily about what should they do for the people with disabilities, the people, having old age or sick people, or even with livestock or important documents or some assets which they should be carrying while evacuating, during the evacuation process. So this means every community member supported by, disaster risk management committees, they understand about pre-established plans and resources. So that enables quicker response to disasters. So that can save lives and reduce chaos during emergencies. So yeah, this is so important in the response as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I think, a lot of us might think of early warning as sort of just the if you like, the techie part and the siren, whoa, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I really love the way, and it's also explained very well in the article that all of this sort of is based on this social structures.
Absolutely.
and things like the drills and so on, which you explained so well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Moving south a little bit, but staying in the subcontinent, Vishal, at All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, I know you've been doing an awful lot of work preparing for and responding to extreme heat. And we often, I think, humanitarians are more used to thinking about drought. We've talked about drought a little bit in terms of Niger, about floods. We've talked about that, in terms of Nepal. Cyclones, tropical storms, perhaps. Heat is really a new thing for a lot of humanitarians. Could you explain to us a little bit why AIDMI sees heat as a humanitarian issue?
Thank you so much. What in the beginning, what Robert from ICRC said, the affected group remains same, whether it is extreme heat or drought or flood or even conflict. side. So extreme heat is an accelerating humanitarian challenge due to its increasingly severe impact on health, livelihood, infrastructure, especially in vulnerable communities. Extreme heat cause illnesses that are life-threatening if not addressed promptly. So it is increasing risk and very rapidly. Vulnerable groups such as the elderly, migrant workers, children, and those with pre-existing condition are at high risk. Similarly, small businesses that plays crucial role in local economy in disaster recovery phase, as well as contribute to national GDP. In the case of India, it is around 40% GDP. And they all are with high exposure of risk and facing negative impact due to extreme heat. Additionally, heat aggravates infrastructure challenges. Energy demand surge during heat waves affect essential services like healthcare, water supply. Heat also severely impact agriculture. Now, there are a number of evidence that how much it reduced the overall production of crop failures and food insecurity aspect. Rising temperature across India are affecting the country's wheat and cotton production, and these vastly impact domestic inflation as well as export to the world, and also other simultaneously other risk aspect. Recent report of ILO mentioned that rising heat stress due to climate change could lead to the loss of 80 million jobs by 2030 worldwide. So this is also a matter of reduce labor productivity in sector like agriculture and construction, as well as banking and consulting. So it affects negatively on economic conditions, particularly for low-income communities. So this growing frequency of extreme heat driven by climate change make this issue even more urgent. As an organization, AIDMI is working on community-based heat action plan for small businesses, early warning dissemination processes for family farmers, and policy support to address these challenges faced by local authorities and businesses. By preparing community and integrating heat mitigation into disaster risk management, we can reduce the humanitarian impacts of extreme heat. So AIDMI is strengthening convergence between humanitarian action, disaster risk reduction, and adaptation to climate change, so that to climate change around extreme heat in 5 states and 11 cities of India. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal Bhai. And I'm sure you won't mind if I plug the fact that AIDMI has produced, I think, 2 issues of the journal South Asia Disasters Net, which focus specifically on the experiences of many different organizations and academics around addressing heat, particularly in South Asia. So people who want to find out more about this can not only go to Humanitarian Exchange, but also those issues of South Asia Disasters Net. And I think it's really interesting what you bring up here, and maybe it's something we'll come on to. The way that heat, like these other impacts, is a sort of double impact. The idea that it has its immediate impact in terms of mortality, deaths, and so on, particularly for vulnerable people, but also it's like many of these climate things, it's damaging people's resilience and their long-term ability to survive in the next crisis. And so it's sort of doing both of these things at the same time, which is a particular evil of climate change. So
yes,
thank you
just
for that.
wanted to add
Yes.
one sentence.
Please.
Align with what you said is, so we're witnessing, in a single year, we facing more frequent co-location of hazards along with cyclone, flood, and extreme heat, which of course affecting this the same community with whom we are working at. Thank you.
And maybe we'll have some questions about how we deal with that, because that is a very challenging situation where all of these things are kind of sitting on top of each other and hitting vulnerable communities at the same time. But for now, before we go to questions, well, I think it probably relates actually to the point you made there, Vishal Bhai. Another question for you, Robert, which is I'd like to ask you about levels of ambition. you know, and what's realistic. So, you know, ICRC, as we've said, is a prominent humanitarian organization. But in the Sahel where you're working, you know, the crisis, the climate crisis, as well as you've told us, the conflict, these multiple crises are so severe, and the resources available to humanitarians are so limited. It's hard to see how humanitarians can really move the dial, can really make a difference. So Robert, I think you started to touch on this in your first intervention, but you know, what can humanitarians usefully do? How can humanitarians make a difference when faced with a crisis as huge as climate change?
Yeah, Paul, I mean, that's a real challenge. I mean, the reality is that the ICRC cannot do it alone. It's clear. I mean, addressing the climate conflict nexus requires collaboration and coordinated action. So it's that's why also we strongly support the COP28 Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration, which is calling for all partners to scale up efforts and also to ensure that people in conflict-affected areas are not left behind. So it is very critical that access to climate finance is being adjusted in order to because the current funding mechanisms, they often fail to reach the communities which are affected by conflict and also then by climate change. So we need to rethink the risk appetite and push for more flexible and scalable financing, which is exactly tailored to these fragile contexts. So at the same time, I mean, the humanitarian aid must be used more wisely. So climate smart programming is about acting early, planning for long term, and also making every intervention count. So in Niger, for example, we use cash for work programs in conflict-affected areas, conflict-affected communities, to focus on climate action. So in 2024, we realized 1,200 kilometers of fire break strips, which is very important to help protect pastures from devastating bushfires. I mean, I talked about the improved cooking stoves. They need still firewood. So we helped to rehabilitate degraded land and to go into afforestation. For our water and habitat program, for instance, I mean, solar energy solutions, they are prioritized where possible. And also water supply, they need to be designed to work also under different climate projection scenarios. So Vishal was talking about heat. So for instance, in detention places, so there it's crucial to respond on these stronger heat waves, which become longer and more intense. So to better ventilate these detention places. But of course, all this requires resources. It requires multi-year engagement, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and also the interlink in order to respond adequately to these interlinked challenges of climate and conflict. I mean, climate smart programming, stronger partnerships, all this helps them to help the communities to better absorb, recover from shocks, but also to adapt and build them for lasting resilience. And yeah, I mean, it's a joint call to address these challenges. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Robert. And I think it is also worth pointing out, you know, the really remarkable work that your organization has done around the funding for climate change and kind of constantly bringing the issue onto the agenda of climate change in fragile and conflict affected states. which is a whole other discussion. I don't know if you have any kind of 1-minute thoughts you'd like to share around kind of where we are in terms of sort of climate financing and humanitarian action. Sorry, I'm springing that on you, but in case.
Well, I mean, yeah, at ICRC, I mean, it's especially in contexts where the issue is not separate, it's inseparable. So the conflict affected communities, which is our mandate, in those contexts, it's the same response. So you need to adjust this response then to make it work also for the changing climate conditions, for the weather extremes hitting these same communities. So it's about making also more with the existing money which we have, which is of course very limited. So to make the programming climate smart, so that these interventions which we do also respond at the same time to climate disasters.
It's an interesting and I think perhaps often overlooked point that a key element of kind of the climate change response, which many organizations who are involved in this climate and conflict work together, is this issue of efficiency. Limited. How do you deal with limited funding? By becoming more efficient, by becoming more effective at what we do. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's go to Achyut, and again, this issue of how do we deal with, not only limited funding, but I think decreased funding. We have decreasing funding very significantly, of course, since we, started planning this session in the humanitarian sector. We have greatly increased scale of needs. And so it's important that humanitarians are thinking about how to use funding efficiently and, alternative or parallel funding mechanisms as well. And one approach that I think many people are interested in is using insurance based mechanisms, not necessarily to replace funding, but to do funding in a different way. Now, it's something I know that you worked on and you talk about in the article in Humanitarian Exchange. I wondered if you could just give us a little sort of overview of how the projects you were involved in used insurance and what you kind of learnt from that. What were the attitudes of the people you were working with, the communities you were working with towards an insurance approach?
Yeah, thank you. I think while working on audio warning system, the learning, we had was that the risk transfer was so necessary for the communities so that we can really help them to become more resilient. So we collaborated with a number of international organizations like Global Parametrics, Stone Step, that's based in Switzerland, I think. Then there was a national insurance company called Shikhar Insurance. And we decided to pilot, an innovative approach. And we are quite able to get funding from Insure Resilience Solution Fund. And at the later stage, Zurich Foundation, that is a foundation of the Zurich Insurance Company, they also supported us financially. And, it was not an easy task because even the conventional insurance for crop loss was not really, widely appreciated or adapted. So there was no intake from farmers. So we're aware that the farmers may not be interested because of number of reasons, but primarily due to, very lengthy process, then delayed the payouts, the insurance payouts that was significantly delayed. But we decided about index-based flood insurance. So when we explained them that, okay, it is a simplified process and payouts can be made based on pre-agreed index, for example, the flood level, which we have already worked together with them during the audio warning, exercises. So they seem to be interested. Then the project designed and introduced the product and piloted in some 5 municipalities in Karnali River Basin in the west. And basically that was aimed for the farmers who were basically exposed with the floods, and they were, witnessing crop loss every year, mainly the paddy. So the farmers from communities within the areas, so, they understood, about the risk. So we selected those risk polygons in the downstream area in the Karnali River, and we started that. And the insurance company enrolled the farmers through the local cooperatives because there are plenty of cooperatives. And the cooperatives, they create a group insurance policy for a farmers group, and whoever were interested, they could join the group in their community. And the verification process was also simplified, and that required only landowner certificate, which they already have. And they needed to get, a small recommendation from the local government, like the ward office of the local municipalities, the rural municipalities or other municipalities. Then when the flood level in the Gez, in the upstream river, reaches some agreed trigger, then farmers become eligible for the respective payout, and they are promptly notified. They get even message in their mobile phones. Then the farmer, they didn't need to make a separate claim, and then the insurance company disbursement. So the insured, they could get insured amount immediately upon validation from the relevant government authority. That was the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. And when the evaluation was done, actually the farmers, they preferred index-based flood insurance, insurance over other indemnity insurance for several reasons. So almost 90% of the farmers said that the enrollment process is really easy. We understand it. Then over 90% also found it easy to claim for payout. So over 80% farmers felt confident in purchasing this insurance after understanding the overall process for enrollment and claim, and that number didn't reduce in the following years. So that was even increasing. So many farmers, they found encouraged to purchase this insurance in the consequent years, and mainly the reason was the easy enrollment, a simple process, then quicker payout. So yeah, these were some of the reasons, and this is a very important step because the risk transfer was really working very well, and the farmers were happy. So we could make them really resilient. So I think, yeah, that was the experience that we had.
And I think that's interesting because it goes back to Robert's points as well a little bit about what is the role of the organization here, and in some cases the role of the organization might be as a sort of middleman to introduce communities and to broader financial mechanisms, for example, which touches a little bit actually on what I wanted to ask you, Lynn, because obviously this is much too big for the humanitarian system. Communities are first responders, and most of the work around climate change adaptation and response to climate loss and damage will be done by the communities themselves, not by humanitarian organizations. But in order to respond effectively, people in communities need to understand the threat. They need to understand what's coming down the tracks. I know that this is an area that Wokike works on, sort of risk communication and engagement with communities. And I wondered, do you find that the people that you work with are aware of the realities of climate change, Lynn? Is this something that people are well aware of? And how do you see your organization and humanitarian organizations helping to support community awareness and community understanding of the threats?
Okay, thank you for that question. So for us, we see that communities have experienced climate change differently, and they can actually relate to some of the climate change impacts like longer droughts, unpredictable rainfall patterns, extreme temperature. So they definitely know something is wrong, but often they don't have the exact scientific words to fully explain what's happening and why. So many communities see these changes as part of natural cycles or even punishment from God. And some communities also associate it with some traditional beliefs or rather than global climate patterns. So this lack of clear information makes it difficult for communities to take proactive measures in responding to climate shock. So that's where awareness and education becomes critical for us. And it's also essential for humanitarian organizations to integrate community education and awareness in climate action. So first, they need to bridge the knowledge gap, and second, for a humanitarian organization, including us, where we provide practical community-led solutions. So for us, when we conduct community awareness, we usually try as much as possible to connect it with the community daily experiences. For example, in our programs, we don't just talk about rising temperatures or carbon dioxide, and so and those big terminologies. We use practical example on how climate change affects things that they relate with daily, like water sources, farming practices, their livelihood, like livestock keeping, and also food security. So this way, we are able to effectively raise awareness on climate change. So humanitarian organizations need first to listen to communities and also to support their solutions by ensuring that their perspectives are able to shape the policies and also are included in the funding priorities.
It's great. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks. And if I can just follow up just very briefly on that, what sort of messages do you find work? You know, you say that people aren't really aware of necessarily of the science, and I certainly myself find the science quite confusing. You know, how do you bring together this local knowledge and, you know, sort of the external scientific knowledge? What works for you?
Okay, there's an aspect of African traditional narrative. So for us, we first of all give them an opportunity to tell their stories and experiences and how they use the practices they have been using to respond to some of these climate change hardships. So from there now, we are able now to come up with a simplified language relating whatever they have shared with us to these climate change topics. That way we are able now to align whatever this scientific language with already what they know, and also the traditional knowledges that within the communities. So we give opportunities for them to develop their stories and give power to whatever they have been using as we introduce some of the new climate change practices and terminologies.
Thank you, Lynn. And anyone who's participating today who wants to find out more about this approach, it's something that I know Wokike has worked on a lot. So please do get in touch with Lynn. I'm sure you wouldn't mind giving some tips. Thank you, Lynn. Coming back to you, Vishal. One of the things I think that, you know, that when we were talking about the panel you brought up is that there's lots going on, as we can hear just from these, you know, across these various different areas, different approaches to addressing climate change, but it's often, you know, very much at the level of these really excellent pilots, and often things are just staying as pilots and not getting scaled up to become kind of standard ways of working, you know. I wondered, you know, what has AIDMI done, or what do you think AIDMI and others can be doing to upscale some of this work so that it just becomes bigger, more citizens are covered, more cities, more work is being done, so you break out of this pilot trap?
So number one is already said about the using resources smartly, and also about the community-based approaches that Lynn mentioned, because it is also multiple stakeholder engagement. But at AIDMI's pilot initiatives focus on community-driven heat action plan, cool measures, early warning education and dissemination, localized response with small businesses, local, state, and national government bodies engagement can be upscaled to benefit more citizens and cities through key strategy approaches. Would like to share briefly five areas. One is government partnership, but obvious to scale up. AIDMI is collaborating with local bodies to integrate heat planning, capacity building, assessment, and solution into development planning. These include creating green spaces and reflective materials in small businesses, knowledge resource, evidence generation. What Achyut said about the evidence generation around this insurance. So same way how risk transfer through insurance can be done, and gender aspect itself is very cross-cutting issue in this risk management work. Another one, partly already addressed, one is educational campaigns. Expanding educational outreach is very crucial. AIDMI is partnering with range of stakeholders to run campaigns about the understanding heat risk, and then after moving step by step to building protection measures to stay safe. This campaign targeting schools, workplace, businesses, communities, to raise awareness and improve preparedness. But of course, what earlier already discussed is, first we need to listen them first, and then after this can be done more effectively. So over 500 communities are requesting such campaigns. So there are huge demand, and it is possible. Another one is data and evidence generation. It provides the foundation for informed decision-making process. Accurate data of affected population, health impact, and also the performance of adaptation measures helps identify at-risk areas and inform policy intervention. A list of over 60 data sources have been identified. Another one is climate consciousness. So increased awareness also drives policy change, like heat action plan in this case, forecast and early warning more effectively, and more performance-based integration, and improved public and health responses with focus on vulnerable population here. So climate consciousness behavior promotes this reducing carbon footprints, which is really very important. Gradually, it needs to be improved further, which is in turn mitigates the long-term effects of global warming, ultimately reducing the frequency and severity of extreme heat events.
Very interesting. So what I'm hearing, the common denominator in a lot of this is if you like, the organization as catalyst to government and community action, rather than the organization as service provider, which of course is a model which we've seen in sort of humanitarian protection work, community-based protection, and elsewhere, but is perhaps something that is still more talked about than done. So maybe the climate threat forces humanitarians more to consider how they can effectively work in this area. We've talked about, and I think this shows the kaleidoscope, the range of activities that are covered in the edition 86 of Humanitarian Exchange, because we've talked about a wide variety of threats. We've talked about heat, we've talked about flooding, we've talked about drought, we've talked about climate-related longer-term damage to environment around water availability, around crops, around firewood. We've talked of a wide variety of ways of addressing the climate challenge, supporting resilience, supporting sort of knowledge and catalyzing knowledge and risk awareness and evidence, anticipatory action, insurance-based approaches. All of these fall into the climate arena. So there's a wide variety of things to ask questions about. We have some questions that have come in. I'm going to go straight there. Let's take a little look. Okay, this is one for anyone on the panel who wishes to respond. The nexus approach. We hear a lot about it. I think good work is being done in quite a wide variety of places around the nexus approach. Development, humanitarian, peace, and climate. How can any of you sort of unpick how nexus, what it actually means in practice when it comes to climate, on the ground? Do any of you have sort of examples of a nexus approach working through your work? Anyone?
Well, I mean, I can try to.
I thought you might. Please take it away, Robert.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really this aspect of inseparable effects which hit the same community. I mean, from the consequences side, there is already a nexus which is the reality hitting the ground, and so then we have also to bring this together in our response. So we need to climate proof in a way whatever we do. So and then, for instance, taking heat waves, as Vishal mentioned. No, it's especially in the Sahel, it matters a lot. So this can be as simple things as using different construction material. You can use stabilized earth bricks when, for instance, when we do construction of certain warehouses. So it's then making the link between what is the context telling you, what are the requirements in order, and then we need to adjust also what we are doing. So I mean that is what we then call the climate smart interventions.
Can I put you a bit on the spot there, Robert, and push a bit further into that? Because I think that's really interesting. What, it's humanitarians thinking about climate in their humanitarian work, so climate proofing the humanitarian work. It's thinking about disaster vulnerability. So again, it's kind of the humanitarian expertise, which is around bad things happening around the disaster part. As part of a bigger understanding of what's going on in a context. Where are those conversations happening? Is this in the HCT? Is it with government? What's the practically where do the conversations happen, and what are they like?
Well, I mean, these conversations I mean, I'm telling you, I'm talking from the field experience. Then that's very much internal discussions when we are looking for the type of response which is the right one. So there is an internal learning process which we are always continuously doing, similarly as other actors, I believe. So learning from the actions which are happening on the ground, but then of course there is also policy discussion happening at all levels. You know, when there is humanitarian platforms, also the clusters on the ground talking to each other. There is a lot of exchange of experience happening, but then of course also taking the COP28 declaration on the climate to integrate the climate agenda into the climate financing to make that work for conflict-affected areas. So that's then really addressing at the upstream level of the stakeholders involved in that response, so that there is sensitivity around that the climate financing is often failing to address really the needs of conflict-affected.
And I'm going to hold you there because we have a question actually about climate financing, which if we have time, I'll loop back to. But thank you for that. Achyut, I know that the Nexus is an area around the Nepal, and I think particularly work in the earthquake that you were quite engaged with. I'd be interested in your reflections here.
Yeah, Nepal is earthquake-prone country, so highly vulnerable. So we had a massive earthquake in 2015. Then simultaneously, we have earthquakes in the western part of the country. Just a couple of years back, also in Jajarkot area, it was a massive earthquake. And the Nexus means, what I mean to say is, it is not only about providing them, the food packages or relief packages according to SPARE manual, but how other organizations can also collaborate so that they can really get different kind of multiple benefits. For instance, organization working in WASH area, they can provide immediate water connections so that they can get potable water. Likewise, the organizations working in agriculture sector, they can distribute the seed of leafy vegetables, which can be grown within a week, and they can get, the required nutrition. Likewise, the organizations working in energy sector, they can provide, the solar panels so that they have at least, the mobile charging facilities, as well as, light energy during night, also some refrigeration for essential medicines. So, I mean, even Practical Action was working in these points, and we tried to, bring all these nexus together so that the community at risk, they were really getting benefits. So just an example.
It's interesting. Thank you for that. It's interesting. There does seem from my observation over the climate programming or climate related programming in humanitarian action, that there is something about the multi-dimensional nature of the threat, which in a way is sort of rather forcing more collaborative, more sort of kind of multi-sectoral work in this area. So it's very interesting to hear that example, albeit from an earthquake. Lynn, question coming for you. A questioner says, it's great to see the work you're doing making connections between gender rights and climate action. Can you share any examples of projects where women are practically leading communities through the challenges? And what more could we be doing to create space for women-led climate action and organizations?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Yes, there are practical examples that we can give in terms of projects that we've done where women have been able to lead in initiatives. One of it is the African Activists for Climate Justice. This is an advocacy project where women are at the forefront of climate justice advocacy, pushing for climate justice policies, building alliances and movements, and also developing African narratives, which are then used to influence the policies in Kenya. So this is a project that Womankind has been implementing for the past 5 years, and it has proven to be effective. Some of the policies that we've managed to influence through the participation of women is the Garissa County Government Climate Change Bill. We have women who have participated in the county integrated development plans, ensuring that the needs and the priorities of women are captured. And where one of the things that we found to be very effective in this engagement is the use of movement. So for us, we build the capacities of grassroots women groups, and then create linkages among them to operate and also work as a movement. Another project that has really worked for us is the support to community-led response to climate emergencies. This is where we directly work with community groups in the effort of promoting localization. So here is where we work directly with the community groups who, after community engagements and stakeholder engagement, they're able to design their own programs, then we make their small contribution. And with that, we are able to complement their efforts and support their initiatives. So it's a flexible approach where different communities come up with different methods and approaches that they wish to implement. So I don't know if I've answered all the questions.
You've answered it very well. I know we could talk about this for a whole hour, but you've answered it very well. Thank you. Unfortunately, our hours are almost up. We're moving to the end of the session. I would recommend everyone, if you have time, to look into the edition of Humanitarian Exchange and also other work. A lot of great work done by AIDMI and South Asia Disasters Net, by the Red Cross. ICRC has done case studies of their work on the ground around climate programming. A lot of work is available on the website of the Climate Charter. So do please look at that. We at ADAPT do our best to pull together stories and learning as well around climate programming. So this is where we are. But Mihir, to close out today, where are we going? What should the next steps? We've talked about there's lots of work going on. There's not a lot of money. How do you see the next steps from here?
Kerry, 86 issue, and I think worth of any such issue or such discussion is its utilization and utilization and utilization. So I think that's the direction I see the discussion going here. Especially when conflicts are increasing at the rate the climate crisis is increasing, and both are overlapping, co-locating more and more. Having looked at the part of the publication and this discussion, I think two ways to go ahead. One, very clearly, is to upscale what kind of examples that we have. And we have a few examples in this publication. And for each of the examples, there are 10 times more in each of the organizations, ICRC or AIDNI or Womenkind, or Practical Action for that matter. And for each of the example, there are 1,000 more in that specific location, geohydroclimatic location. So a lot is going on, a lot is going on. So how do you upscale that? That's one. And second, how do you wide scale that? So I think those are the two very, very different, definite areas I see as a next step. Broadly speaking, upscaling would include I was taking the notes, to having more pilots, more demonstrations, more lessons learned exercise, such as this, more review of such pilots and demonstrations. So basically upscaling means, as we know, better quality, better impact, better results. And for that purpose, this would be something worth doing. And the resources, new and existing resources, which are already being spent, if they're spent differently by bilateral organizations, by the foundations, especially for these kind of efforts, and by international NGOs who raise their own fundraising. I think that's the upscaling direction that I see. For wide scaling, again, looking at the document, the exchange paper and the discussion that we had, using these experience and these examples and the experience behind that to build capacity where they are possible to implement. So how do you turn this into a way of encouraging, taking practical actions on the ground using these examples? So that's one big area. The second big area is to very easily list the policy bottlenecks. It will be international policy, national, subnational, and how do you use these examples to change those policies so that it could be wide scale. And third and last is knowledge products such as these, such as these, so that we can accelerate the rate at which we are doing greening of conflict-related humanitarian response. I think what we are doing essentially, as Robert, you said, acting early, long-term actions, and every action counts. I think what we are doing by greening this humanitarian, conflict-related humanitarian action is bringing in more solidly the idea of humanitarian justice. And it's in that direction that this takes us, because it's not only between the conflicting parties, it's all of humanity. It's not only humanity, mankind, womankind, but it's also about nature beyond that. So that's the direction I see going, upscaling and wide scaling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mihir, for finishing us on that. Upscaling and wide scaling, you heard it here. Let's see next year how far we've come in doing that in these difficult circumstances. Mihir, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it's been co-editing this edition with you. To our colleagues at ODI, many thanks for not only hosting the webinar, but also giving us the opportunity to work on this edition of Humanitarian Exchange. And to the people who made it happen. our panelists and also the other authors who've been involved. There have been many rounds of thinking and discussion. It's been a great pleasure working with you. So thank you very much. Kudos and applause to you. And last but by no means least, thank you for those of you who've taken time out of your busy schedules to join in with us today. And with that, I think we will close the webinar. And I hope everyone has an opportunity to see the edition and give us some feedback on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Everybody.
All the
Thank you,
participants.
Thank you so much.
Ramra.
It's very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you.